Blake, I'm going to do something different today. Instead of firing you, I'm going to can somebody else.
Oh, goody. Let's finally throw someone into the fire.
So, Blake, we're going to can our old cans.
I've got the gasoline already.
So for reference, here at Church Gear, we love to help churches save money. And that's kind of part of our mission. And so one of the things we did when we started this podcast is let's find the best equipment we need to make it. But in what ways can we cut corners? And Blake, how did we cut some corners around our ears?
Because Toby's cheap. I mean, frugal. And we just pulled some in-ears, or no. We pulled some cans out of Toby's closet under some mothballs and some news clippings from the 1980s.
Now, these cans did their job, much like your Nissan Rogue does its job to get you to point A and point B. But once you step inside a Ferrari, Blake, I don't think you would ever want to drive that Nissan Rogue again.
Here's the thing, though. When you say they did their job, the job they did was made us look ugly and ridiculous, like I look in a Nissan Rogue.
And so after 2+ years of doing the podcast, and it felt like every great guest we'd bring on would have these beautiful custom in-ears. And Blake, we're always a little late to the party, but here we are.
It only took like 64 people showing up with great in-ears to where we were like, you know what? We got to get some of those.
Yeah, it's like we needed 64 reasons to get into the in-ear game.
Yeah, and I mean, really, I was convinced after number 3, but the 64 reasons really got me going.
Yeah, and our budget was $64, and we realized that we, couldn't get anything for $64.
So we said, what if we got a sponsor? You can't buy your way onto the Church Gear podcast, but you can bribe your way with a gift or a sponsorship.
A Ferrari?
Sorry, Toby. No Ferrari for you. I wouldn't trust you behind the wheel with that. But 64 Audio is now our sponsor.
They sure are. And we have brought our favorite representative of our sponsor, 64 Audio in, Eddie Cruz.
Hey, guys.
Welcome to the Church Gear. What do they call this? Like a metaverse here?
The Church Gear verse.
Yeah.
And Eddie flew all the way down from Vancouver, Washington. So I'm just saying, Eddie, really loves us. He flew down here just for this, not for anything else.
For this.
That's right.
I looked at my calendar and I was like, hey, Blake, can I stop by?
Yeah, it wasn't like you were hanging out with King and Country or Elevation while you're in town. Nope. It was all about the Church Gear
All
podcast.
about Church Gear.
So speaking of name dropping, give us some of the, artists and A-level talent that trust their ears to 64 Audio.
Yeah, so some of the A-lists that we work with, like Beyonce, One Republic, in the kind of Christian CCM world, we got for King and Country, also Chris Tomlin, Lauren Daigle, and of course the ever-famous Blake Hodges.
Ever infamous Blake Hodges.
Where do you think we rank, Toby, on that list now that we're in the 64 Audio family?
Pretty high up, I would say. We do have a software engineer here at Church Gear that can hack into the 64 Audio website and just move us up the ranking boards.
Wow, I didn't know that we were threatening our new sponsors, but hey.
We're not threatening, it's providing an opportunity.
Whatever we can do for you to love us a little more. I mean, they did love us with these in-ears, though, and I'm feeling like that was enough.
It does feel, Eddie, like my ears exist inside a Ferrari now.
That's amazing. That's the goal.
Blake, does it feel any different to you rather than these crummy old cans that we lived with for 2 years?
It was truly wild to be fully immersed. And whenever you were getting your fillings and you couldn't hear me, I was like, 64 Audio is more powerful than my annoying voice. I can't break through to Toby. It kind of crushed my soul, but that's how powerful these things are.
Yeah, every time I am so sick of you, I just put in my 64 ears and tune you out. It's amazing.
Do you guys hear music differently with them? Because when I started listening to some Taylor Swift, which I'm now switching to Beyonce, obviously, it sounded completely different. Like I'd heard.
Yes, definitely. So Eddie, give us just, I'm used to, and I think Blake is used to, like just putting in our AirPods and then you put in your custom in-ears and things sound wildly different. So
yeah, definitely. So we have models ranging all the way from 2 drivers all the way up to 18 drivers per ear. So one of the things that I like to tell people is like even just what we refer to as an entry-level 2-driver is great because it offers you all the customization options in terms of fit and the design. It satisfies the need of, hearing protection with getting a custom seal in that regard. But then the 18 driver is going to be the top of the line. You're going to hear things, like Blake said, that you've never heard before. And even with just the 2-driver, that happens. So every different model has something to offer. It's just about the taste and profile you're going for.
Blake, can you imagine listening to the Church Gear podcast with 18 drivers in your ear?
I think I would ascend right to heaven. just right then.
It's definitely an angelic experience.
Oh man, we better cut this short before we commit. What is it? Not hypocrisy, but
yes, I know what you're saying. What's the word?
We have not
heresy.
Heresy.
Heresy. We
Yes.
got it. And Eddie, if any of our listeners order their custom 64 audio ears and then want to diamond encrust them like Beyonce did, is that something that 64 will do, or do they need to do that on their own?
That would definitely be something on their own.
Okay, Blake.
get some diamonds on these.
Yeah.
What I'd like to do now, guys, is let's go out. I'm not kidding. Let's go out in the back and burn the cans with some lighter fluid and post it. I think that'd be fun.
Let's do it.
Blake, if you had kids, what would their number one personality trait be?
Toby, my wife and I are opposites, so I have no idea how they'd turn out.
Welcome to the Church Gear Podcast, where we pull the tech out of the booth and onto the stage to share the most outlandish stories and hidden wisdom from the tech trenches. And now, here are your hosts.
I'm your host, Blake Hodges, a man who can't bear to put the world through more of me in it. And I'm here with my co-host, who is dying for me to have children and use paternity leave, Toby Walters.
Paternity leave for you. I think the world has voted against you reproducing.
Yeah, but see, you conducted that poll, so I just don't know that I believe it.
Do you notice how I'm constantly carrying a microwave around your midsection?
Oh my gosh, you do get a lot of core workout with that.
Do you remember that moment in the office when Dwight is trying to lower his sperm count and he just like stands in front of the microwave?
I don't, and I don't know if we should cut that or not, but you know
we'll
what?
find out. We'll let Ross decide, our
Gracious.
wonderful editor. He is a very wise man. So speaking of kids, Blake, I have two of them, and you sent a picture of a drawing on our like kind of brainstorm whiteboard in the company this morning.
It was Peppa Pig being mutilated by another Peppa Pig. I said, whoever drew this, we're here for you. This is a cry for help.
Yeah, so my kids are pretty artistic, and they're also just quirky, which I love. I love that my kids are quirky, and so
They get it honest.
My daughter drew Peppa Pig and decided, well, I'm going to have Peppa murdering her brother. So,
Toby, aren't you worried that might be telling about her future plans?
not based on my childhood, because I'd make jokes like that, in my family as well. It's Blake, you've met my family. You've had family dinner with us. The way that we joke with each other, did that really freak you out the first time?
Yes, they talked about killing their grandfather a bunch. Like,
But to get the inheritance.
Oh, so that makes it better? Toby's going to get an HBO documentary one day.
So when you just spilled your entire water.
No.
Good work, Blake.
That was really loud in the inners.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to edit that.
Okay. So Blake, I started doing sound when I was 13. My dad was a music director, and I think in order to keep me out of trouble, he said, would you like to try, mixing audio on a Sunday morning?
So your dad got you your first job?
Essentially.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd say so. Didn't pay anything. It, sucked the life and soul out of me
I thought you loved that job.
I did love it, but also, we all have just stories of hurtful things that happen through church. Do you have some of those stories, Blake? Not that we're going to get into them. Or has everything been peachy for you?
Stuff that's happened to my friends. And if you did it to my friends, you did it to me.
Okay. So, and now, I'm a generation ahead now. I have my daughter's 14 and my son is 12, and they're getting involved with things around church gear. And obviously, step one is draw pictures of Peppa Pig on the whiteboard, but then, just bringing them in and helping develop their skill set. And I've always thought that church production is such a magical place for young people to get involved. Blake, where have you seen the most recruitment come to the church production world?
It's all out of the youth program. I mean, this is why people are winning awards like Alec Takahashi in their early 20s.
Yeah, because they started in youth. And so I think just, a great way to connect with, I found from my own kids, is to invite them into my world. And I think we're going to get to talk a little bit about just, fathering today. Now, you're going to just have to listen, Blake, because you don't have kids. But maybe this will help you decide by the end of this episode whether you should or not.
Toby, I got more experience with kids than you could ever dream of, because you're always out on the road. I spent many years as a preschool teacher, so I've got more hours of kids experience than you, my friend.
I'm sure if we add up how many hours I've fathered over the last 14 years and your time as a preschool teacher, that you would definitely win.
Oh, for sure. For sure. And speaking of someone who would win Father of the Year, the monitor engineer and RF coordinator for Need to Breathe, Luke Combs, and the Beatles, Dan McLaughlin.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
He said your name wrong, didn't he?
It's fine.
They
both work.
So, Dan, before this podcast, I tried to get you on my side as I was teasing Blake, and you said you were on Team Blake.
I am team underdog. And the podcasts I've listened to, I'm just going to like stick with that. But he has like 1 hour or however long this goes to kind of like keep me, or I can fall over to the dark
I feel
side.
like I'm a politician trying to woo an undecided voter.
Yeah. And you ragged on his home state of Ohio, so he is veering towards Switzerland right now.
I said I didn't understand how big it was. That is a big difference in ragging on it.
I'm pretty sure you said it's the worst. So
Because people, it makes you miss it in the like, what's the 10 highest states? You know, I got that answer wrong once and it scarred me. Let's do the 5 truths and a lie. Let's pivot over here.
I wonder if there's some Ohio trivia in here.
That would
That'd be
be fun.
exciting.
All right, so our 5 truths and a lie, our game that we do every week to introduce our guest, and they've got one line they're trying to fool us. And me and Toby are competing all year to see who can guess the most right. Number 1, I'm proudly born and raised in Bay Village, a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio.
Well,
This is a long con. He's never lived in Ohio a
that
day
would
in
be
his
amazing.
life.
Yeah.
Like
never
never
know.
even toured through Ohio. That'd be amazing.
Number 2, I've toured as a front of house and monitor engineer, RF coordinator, stage manager, drum tech, guitar tech, and playback tech.
What if just one of those is a lie?
Are all those real things?
I'm not going to tell you.
Dang it. Number 3, I forgot to sync the band's IEM packs and got it done only seconds before they walked onto stage to 80,000 people.
That would have been a bad move if he hadn't fixed it in time.
I
But
just love the image of Dan like running behind them trying to clip it on the back of their pants in front of everybody.
that's not how that works. But go ahead.
Number 4, I would regularly coordinate approximately 110 frequencies for the Luke Combs Stadium tour. Number 5, I flew to Australia to mix one show. Dang. People get mad at celebrities for, flying like 15 minutes for a burger.
Maybe he borrowed Taylor Swift's plane.
We live in Nashville.
Yeah, it's possible.
one of 3. She's got a bunch.
Okay.
Number 6, I took my family to Disney World last year and it was borderline miserable.
Wow.
Ooh.
Rip the heart out of our chief of staff, Brian, who is a Disney, what?
Fanatic. I think
Fanatic.
he helps plan trips for
does.
people to
Yep.
Disney.
Yep.
Nice.
Okay. And you know what? In that vein, I'm going to say that's a lie. Dan
Yeah, I was gonna go
seems
with that
so
too, but-
cool. I think he had a great time.
Yeah. I'm going to go with the 110 frequencies for the Luke Combs Stadium show. That just sounds insane. So I'm going to say nobody's ever coordinated that many frequencies outside of the Air Force or something silly.
Why would the Air Force do sound frequencies?
It's wireless frequencies if they have radio communications.
All right.
All right.
All right, Dan, we're locked in.
You guys are both wrong.
Well, at least Blake didn't gain any traction on this one.
All right. So I was raised in Bay Village, Ohio. I was born in Chicago, Illinois. So
how
I
are we
kind of
supposed
did
to
the
know
like
that,
one
Dan?
tweak. That's the point, isn't it?
That is a sneaky lie.
I respect it. Okay, tell us about, the Australia mixing one show.
That was actually earlier this year. So for the first 6 months of this year, I mixed a guy named Tyler Hubbard, and he used to be in Florida Georgia Line and now does a solo thing. And we were doing a festival. We got booked to do that over there. I think it's called the CMC Rocks Festival. And so we flew, 17 or 15 hours all the way over to Australia, landed, had a day off, did a festival, and then flew back the next day. So we were borderline in the air longer than we were on the ground.
That's my nightmare because, Blake, you're right there with me. We hate to fly. And so flying for, 35 hours total? 40 hours?
Something like that with connections and things like that.
I don't think I could do that for 10 grand.
Yeah.
If someone paid me 10 grand, I couldn't do it.
I remember reading a biography of some celebrities, and Leonardo DiCaprio and Jamie Foxx did this thing one year where they celebrated New Year's, and I forget which one, but it was either LA or Sydney, and then they flew to the other one and got there in time to celebrate it again in the other city. And I was
That's
like,
amazing.
that might be a very egregious use of airline miles.
Oh, yeah, it's wild. When you're flying back from there, you'll leave at 1 p.m. and fly for 17 hours and land at 10 a.m. the same day.
Yeah.
You've gone back in time obviously when you fly there, you like lose almost a whole day. So it kind of evens out. But
It's like flying the DeLorean, Blake.
Yeah, that sounds like better than lunch money right there to do that kind of trip. Okay, why was Disney World miserable, man? What happened?
it was rough. Like, so we waited. My kids are now 11 and 9. When we took them, they were 10 and 8. And we waited. We're like, we're not going to take our kids to Disney when they're 3. They won't remember it. We're going to, like, if we're going to pay this amount of money to go on a trip, they need to like remember it, have it be like a core memory. And we probably spent months prepping them, watching like YouTube videos and things like that. Like, check it out. We're going to Disney, rides and lines. That's what this place is. Like, there's some magic of you can buy some ears and put them on your head, that sort of thing. But it's like you stand in line and you ride rides. That's what this place is. Be ready to stand for an hour and then ride a ride for 4 minutes. Like, that is how this works. And we got there, and the first line, they're like, we don't like this. We don't want to do it. Like, just all the whining and all this stuff. And we're like, nope, we're doing it. So we like made them get on the ride and we did it. And then we went to get in the next line. We don't want to do this. So there was just so much like arguing about why are we standing in lines that we both lost our patience very, very quickly. And we were only there 3 days. And by day 3, we're like, okay, like we're glad this is the end. But we look back on it half fondly. Like, the kids don't look back on it poorly. So I guess we can say that it's like kind of a win. But we look back, we're like, we want to go to Disney without our kids. Like, that sounds awesome. Like, we'll stand in line. We'll ride all the rides that they didn't want to ride, that sort of thing. So it was
Like,
a
when you went
challenge.
to Disney with your dad, Brian Deshawn, before Exponential, did you whine while you're standing in all the lines?
You'd have to ask him, but I thought I had a great time. I mean, it was one of the best couple days of my life. Don't tell him because, that's too vulnerable, but it was awesome.
And talk to us about a ridiculous amount of frequencies. How do you coordinate 110 frequencies?
And did you do it for the military?
I did not do it for the military. The military can really screw you, though, when they just start broadcasting stuff that they weren't before. That's a challenge. But on the Luke tour, we carried 50-ish channels of RF just for ourselves. And then we had 4 opening acts. And my goal on that tour every day was to give those opening monitor engineers frequencies so they didn't have to do it themselves. And I would coordinate everything so 2 acts could be on at the same time. So counting backups is usually more like 130, but like active channels of RF was 110. And so I would get all of their information, well ahead of time. I would get scans from the area that I could ahead of time and just coordinate everything out and put everyone in different zones so they could be on at certain times. And I had to kind of play RF police a little bit and go around to the guys, be like, hey, when you're not sound checking, your stuff is off. When you're on stage, your stuff is on. Had to go around to quite a few backline guys like, hey, I know you want to check your guitar right now while the other band is playing. We're not doing that, like that sort of thing. But it was a lot. There were some towns where it was pretty simple, and then some towns like Dallas and Houston and those areas or Phoenix are just really, really challenging. So
One of our favorite techs, Alexa Page, is at Fellowship Church, which is basically right next to DFW Airport.
Yep.
And that's a little bit tricky when you have all those frequencies and competing interests.
Yeah, our first show was at the Dallas Cowboys Stadium in Arlington, and it was definitely like a challenge, but we got it.
So Team Blake hates you right now because he hates the Cowboys.
Well, I don't hate. He's a Browns fan.
You just booed him.
I boo that they were at Dallas Stadium.
Do you even boo a Browns fan? It's just like kicking people while they're down.
I'm
it's
booing
rough.
that he was at Dallas Stadium. Toby.
No, I'm just saying, like, for Browns fans, do you bother booing them? Because it's like,
I
you just
boo
feel
the
so bad for them.
Cowboys and sometimes the Eagles and the Giants.
Okay, and that's it.
That's it.
Okay.
Everybody else is Gucci. We
Nice.
fine. Okay. There was one more I wanted to ask.
Da-da-da-da.
Yeah. Okay. Forgetting to sync.
Is that the sound of your brain working? Da-da-da-da.
It's you ever seen like dancers with the little tiptoes when they? That's my brain.
I was thinking a little chimpanzee with a typewriter. Da-da-da-da.
No, that would be more click clack. This is going off the rails. I forgot to sync the band's IEM packs and got it done only seconds before they walked on stage to 80,000 people. So what band was it? How many beats per minute was your heart going at this point?
So it was for Luke Combs. It was in 2021 or 2022. We were doing a festival in Quebec, which oddly enough, like 80,000 people showed up for a country festival in Quebec. It was amazing. So it's one of those days where we loaded in really early, like had to be up at 6 or 7 a.m., load in. The band doesn't even sound check. So we were done by like 9 in the morning. It was awesome. We had one of the best, what almost felt like a day off. We like walked all around the town and these old cobblestone streets that felt like you're in Europe. It was like French Canadian, really cool. Went to one of the oldest bars in North America and had a beer. It was awesome. And we get back and we line check everything right before the show starts. And I walk over and the band guys are like, hey, we can't hear anything. Does Zeus, who he was the monitor engineer at the time, or still is.
Would he introduce himself as Zeus?
Yeah, his name's Michael Zusso, but everyone calls him Zeus. He and I went to college together. We've known each other for 20 years. He's a great dude. I've learned a lot of like Digicode tricks and things like that from him. But they're like, hey, would Zeus have us muted? And I was like, I don't think so. Let me see your packs. And they hold them up. And none of them have the blue light on, which is on a PSM 1000, what tells you whether you're receiving RF or not. And I was like, oh, crap. So all of our gear rides in cases. The in-ear case for the band is separate from all the other packs for like the crew and stuff like that. And I just have this moment of panic, like, oh crap, I forgot to do that case. Like, the 8 most important packs on the stage, I forgot to do those ones. So this is like, we, at the time, AC/DC's Thunderstruck was like the start of the show. And it was like a 2-minute thing. And I was like, give me your stuff, crap, like grabbing it from them. They're all taking off their belts, handing it to me. I'm carrying them like this, just like sprinting across the stage, like in front of people. I'm like, I'm not going backstage. Like, I don't care. I'm just going out there. And I like hold 4 of them and I hand 4 of them over the console to Zeus. I'm like, I forgot to sync them. Take them. So I hand them to him and we're like syncing all like these 8 packs. And I take the 8 of them back and like sprint back. We get to where the band is standing. I start handing them out. They put them on their belts, turn them on. They're like, hey, we're good. And like I bend down, put it on Luke's belt, plug his ears in, turn it on, and it goes, you've been thunderstruck. And they walk on stage. And that's how it went. So it was probably 160 beats per minute of what my heart was doing. But it was like, the way Zeus put it, he's like, well, technically you like didn't forget to do your job. You just like didn't do your job in probably the best timing. So that has never happened again, which is good.
Did they get mad? Did they even notice?
No. I went and talked to Luke after the show and he's like, dude, I don't care. We did a show. It was great. Like, he's the most down to earth guy in the world. But like, that was like one of the telling signs that he is like just so chill. And he's like, we had a lot of fun. It was great. Thanks for doing it. I was like, you're welcome.
So Blake, I feel like you would have passed out and had a heart attack halfway across the stage just because you're in such bad shape.
100%. Like,
is it important to like have like be in decent physical shape for touring?
I mean, I'm probably in the same shape Blake is, so maybe
I got to tell you, my body hides weight so well. Maybe country guys are all cool then, because Luke was cool. We know Keith Urban is super cool. Like, maybe they're the ones to tour for. Maybe they're the most cool. Also, using Thunderstruck, wasn't the licensing on that like insanely expensive?
That is far above my pay grade for those decisions.
Don't we guess though? Like, that would have been an expensive thing.
I'm sure it's not cheap. I know like the Dallas Cowboys, their cheerleaders come out to it every home game. So I'm sure it's expensive, but you got a lot of money flowing through certain organizations as well.
Dollar bills, y'all. Well,
you need to write an updated version of Thunderstruck that's not infringement, and so that you can start cashing those paychecks if they use it, Blake.
You know what? I just resigned. This is my 2-second notice. Okay, well, something that didn't take 2 seconds. It took many years. Dan's tech background. So, Dan, you're in key production roles for events with, as you already said, 80,000 plus people. Give us like a snapshot of your background and what led you to running across the stage at 160 beats per minute.
Sure. So I grew up in a home where my mom was a music teacher before she had kids. So started playing piano when I was young, and then started playing guitar when I was in middle school, and realized by high school, like, as much as I wanted to be a guitar player, I wasn't good enough to like have this be my thing. So I was like, what's the next closest thing I can do? And I was like, well,
sounds like you figured it out early. Not everyone figures it out early.
Blake, you're fired.
So, Yeah, so I learned pretty quick that like, okay, I like this, but it's not gonna I don't think it's gonna work out. So what can I do to be around it? And I was like, well, I could be in a studio. Like I could do audio things. That's around the guitar a lot. So that sounds fun. So at the time in 2004, I Googled audio recording school, and the first thing that came up was Full Sail, and that was a 2-year degree, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do a 4-year degree, and my parents wanted me to do a 4-year degree. And the next down the line, and it might have been Ask Jeeves, it might have been Yahoo. I don't know what it was. Maybe Google, I'm not sure. But the next one down the line was MTSU. That was like the first list, audio school on the list that had a 4-year degree. So I was like, okay, I'm going there. And we came, like I'd already decided, we came down and visited. I was like, yep, I'm going there. So I went to school for audio at MTSU, decided to get engaged, which I'm still married to my wife of 14 years. But in that process, when I was talking to her parents about getting married, they said, yes, you have our blessing. I did the traditional, like, hey, can I marry your daughter thing? But you have to have a job first. And I was like, okay, like that makes sense. Like if I'm going to provide for your daughter, I have to do that. So I just started applying everywhere. And so there's this website called churchstaffing.com.
Oh, yes.
And I used that website and I
used it many times.
I applied for a job and ended up getting a job, kind of lying my way into becoming an audio guy at a big mega church in Kalamazoo, Michigan. The only lie I would say is they said, have you heard of the Yamaha M7? And my response was yes, because I had heard of it many times. Had I ever touched one? Zero. And they probably don't, no one there knows that to this day. But I showed up and got a job and got a full-time job. So we did that and really only lived there for a year because my church that I grew up in Bay Village, Ohio, it's like a 1,300 person Presbyterian church, so not big, not small. They reached out to me maybe 6 months after I started working at this church and said, hey, we've never had a full-time production person. We're going to hire our first full-time production person. Can you help us write a job description? And I said, yeah, sure. So I typed it up, sent it to them. 6 months later, they said, hey, we can't find anyone to do this job. Would you want to do this job? I was like, would I want to do the job that I wrote the description for? Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. And they said, also, we'll hire your wife because we need someone with a theater background to run our children's production. And I was like, okay, great. So we moved home essentially. And I worked in that church for 6.5 years, started mixing a local band. At that time, that went on tour with opening for Need to Breathe in 2016. So I then started working for Need to Breathe 2016 to 2018, did the Luke Combs thing from 2019 until last year, and now I'm actually back mixing Need to Breathe. So,
Blake, I'm wondering if you wrote your own job description, what would it look like?
I did write my job description here.
Like make ridiculously stupid videos for social media and give me a mic so I can just say dumb things.
Dan, literally every week I go, this is the dumbest, best, weirdest job ever when we're shooting videos. Dan, I think you get the award for the most ground covered, but in a succinct manner on your background.
And we appreciate that so much.
That's, impressive.
I can usually talk for a really long time. So like while I was going through that, I was like, oh, don't be long, don't be long, don't be long. Like my dad and I are both like in our family known for like, you ask us a 2-minute question and we'll talk for 30. So I'm trying to like keep it succinct.
Speaking of talking long, last night at youth, one of my boys, now they're 10th graders, he's got a new girlfriend and he's like, the only thing is she just talks a lot. I said, Wesley, have you ever met a woman? Yeah. It's amazing.
That is the one thing my wife and I are opposites. Like I'll talk forever and she'll be like, yep. Like it's kind of nice.
My wife always comes for details for me. She's always like, what did they say? I'm like, I don't know. I was thinking about what I was going to say.
It's funny. One of my best buds in my men's group, he was sort of, sad this week because he said, my wife just doesn't really want to know all the details of my day. And I'm like, okay, you're backwards in your marriage. All right.
Can we trade? Yeah. She gets frustrated because I don't remember. I just don't. I goldfish it. All right. Nice. We're getting off track. Toby, hit us with a question.
So speaking of family, I read a lot of biographies, and one of the themes I see over and over of some of the, specifically men that have achieved incredible things is they lost their family along the way.
Yeah.
They were married, they had kids, and the biggest regret of their life is that they didn't spend time with their kids. They don't know their kids. How does a production person protect against that, especially if you're, really into your craft, you're working long hours, maybe you're going on tour?
Other than going to Disney and having a bad time.
Yeah, which we might try that again in a couple years. Like it's not, we don't think it's fully lost. It's just, okay, maybe at that time, like we'll let them get a little older and see if they mature into it a little more.
Report back, Dan, even if it's 5 years from now. Text
I'll let
us.
you know. I'll let you know. I would say it might be like the stereotypical like therapist answer, but like setting very clear boundaries and then working with people that will respect those boundaries, I think are really, really important. With what I do, I know that when I'm gone, like the very best I can be is dad over FaceTime or husband over FaceTime. Like my wife a couple weeks ago actually ended up needing to like have a surgery last minute. And the very best I could be was like, I was on the phone with a ton of people here, setting up stuff for the kids, setting up rides for her, setting up all these different things because I was gone. But when I'm home, I try and be very clear with my boundaries of like, I am dad, I am husband. If I have to, like yesterday, I had to talk on the phone for 20 minutes and it was eating me up. Not like super guilty, but I was just like, this is not what this time is for. So I'm going to make this, like we're talking about, as succinct, as like quick as I can, because right now is dad time. Right now I'm home. And I think that's really, really important. So like when this surgery thing happened with my wife, the guys in Need to Breathe were like, do you need to go home right now? If you need to get on a plane in 10 minutes, we'll put you on a plane in 10 minutes and we'll get you there. Like they understand that that's like the most important thing. When I worked for them back in I guess this was 2017 or 2018, my son had an accident where he actually ended up needing to have a surgery. And luckily we were off the road and I was home, but we were supposed to leave maybe a few days later or a week later. They're like, listen, come if you can, don't if you don't. It doesn't matter. Like, they were really, really pivotal and helpful in that idea of I had these ideas of boundaries and I never even communicated them, but they fully respected it and were open to that. I know Luke was the same way when I worked for him. There's guys who have had to like leave for a last minute funeral and he's like, why are you here? Go, leave. Like, so surrounding yourself with people that will respect that, but then also having your own version of that and having those boundaries placed, I think is really, really important to me. And that seems to be working. My wife's happy. My kids are happy. So I'd say that that's going all right.
And one of the things I've found is, I'll read about that, set clear boundaries and let people know. And I think it's kind of human condition to assume, well, I can't do that. Like I have a job to do. Like they might need me. That's too much. And once you actually set those boundaries, usually most people are like, all right,
yep,
I'll just call you outside of that window.
Right.
It's fascinating how quickly the good people respect those boundaries and don't really question it.
Yeah. I've thought about like applying in the past for jobs when I see people post things about being like a production manager. I don't think I'd be a good tour manager, but maybe a tour manager. But those guys just like live on their phone and they have to be accessible like 24 hours a day. So I've just told myself, like based on the health of my family and the health of myself, like maybe when my kids are out of school and not in my house anymore, I would consider doing one of those jobs. But for now, I kind of want nothing to do with it. Like because I want to go home and just be home. And so that's like a boundary. That might be putting a ceiling on me or, my future prospects. But for now, I'm like, that is a ceiling I'm more than willing to put so that like yesterday, when I got home and I took the kids to the pool and I was like, that's what we're doing. We're doing dad time. We're doing family time. We're going to go out to dinner. We're going to do that sort of stuff. I'm not going to be on my phone trying to like be a production manager hiring someone because I don't want that job because of the season I'm in. So,
yeah, former Bucks head coach Bruce Arians said in an interview, he'll fire you if he finds out you came to work during an important family thing. Now, my assumption is he won't actually. He's just trying to prove a point. But I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. And Blake, I've noticed you've set up clear boundaries in your life. So here it is, late August, and you said last night that you gave your wife her 2-week notice because football season is starting.
I'm not your husband on Sunday, Thursday night, Monday night. I mean, that's just how it goes.
So you're kind of following Dan's advice in reverse, where you're putting boundaries against your wife.
Yeah, I'm doing the boundaries part, but not for the benefit of my family.
You got to get them into what you're into. So like I'm into Formula One car racing. And so my son now watches the Formula One races with me. So I can be like, honey, we're doing this together. It's an us thing, So
Dan, I have bought my wife so much Commanders gear, great gear. It looks awesome. And I said, babe, it's going to be a good season this year. And she goes, you truly are Charlie Brown, aren't you, honey?
Sound like a Browns fan.
See, I've tried to get my son to be interested in Lakers because the Lakers are my team. That's what I love. And he'll watch it as long as I'm scratching his back.
Nice.
Scratch his back, he'll scratch yours. Oh my goodness.
So not everybody gets to write their own job description.
True.
Pretty much everybody has to, sort of vet a job that they're looking at. What are some of the considerations that our church tech community should be looking at when they're considering jobs, either in a church or on the road? Like, what are some of those important details that often get overlooked?
I think it's really hard to tell in the moment, like when you're there. So, but I would say like culture is a really, really big part of it, whether that's touring, whether that's church. So I'm a strong proponent of, I understand churches might think a situation is dire and we have to hire someone tomorrow, but it's like, if you can bring someone in, especially if they're local and they're not moving across the country, and say, hey, we're going to try this for a few weekends. We're going to have you work here for a couple of weeks. We'll pay you really well. Let's give it a go and try. You'll see culture really, really quickly within a few weeks, more so than if you just kind of take like the dry hire sort of thing. And that's part of the reason why the first job I had at that church up in Michigan, like I enjoyed it and I learned a lot, but ultimately I learned pretty quickly, even at the age of 23, like this is a place that I can work for a while, but I don't think this is a place that I'm going to fit in long-term, because culturally I didn't get the vibe on a 2-day interview, but I did get the vibe obviously after months of being there. And I think finding people, like we were talking about, boundaries that set healthy boundaries within that culture too. Like I am of the mindset that the church job, the church tech, whether you're a church pastor or a youth minister, any of those things are very, very important things. Like we're dealing with souls of people, that matters. But at the same time, like unless you're like a pastor who goes to hospital for visits, like generally, like we're not curing cancer in what we're doing. So yes, you need to preach a good message. Yes, your snare drum should sound awesome. But the reality is, like when you come home, when people leave that church, like they're not getting saved because your snare drum sounds great. And so
how dare you, Dan?
I'm sorry. But like if you go home, and I understand people say like, oh, well, when you're in ministry, your spouse is in ministry. But it's like if you go home at 5 or 6 p.m. at night, hopefully you're able to leave that early. If not, that's a red flag right there. But past that, if you go home at 5 or 6 at night and you can't stop answering emails or answering phone calls or stop thinking about, oh my gosh, I have to do this stage set tomorrow and where am I going to patch the ukulele or whatever? Like, who cares? Like, just like we get so tunnel visioned. And I did that in church too. And that I would say was one of my biggest downfalls in working there, that leaving the church really opened my eyes. Like I shouldn't say leaving the church. I'm still very involved in our church. I mix there on the weekends when I'm home. Like I'm in a small group, I'm in a D group. We do all these things that I really love. They pour into my family and into my kids. And with this whole like issue of my wife 2 weeks ago, like they, along with her parents, like did everything. Like they brought us meals. They took our kids for sleepovers. They did all these things. Like I am a strong, strong proponent of that. But you need to be able to say no. You need to be able to walk away. You need to be able to disconnect and not have that like take up every second of your brain and of your processing. So when you're looking for a job, finding a culture that puts things in the appropriate perspective, to me would borderline be the top of the list. Because if I ever stopped touring, I'd consider working at the church again for sure. Like it's something that's not off the table, but I can't live in this like tunnel vision of like the only thing that matters in the world is just what I do right here, to where then my family gets neglected. Or the reality is like people who work in the church a lot of times don't share the gospel with people outside of the church because they never leave the church. You know, so the reality is like you're supposed to be what is it in the world, but not of the world. So if that's the case, you can't be in the world if you just like lock yourself in a brick building.
Yeah,
you know. So that's.
I think in my experience, one of the most crucial things to look at is what is the staff turnover rate at the church you're looking at. I remember there was one in California, and I hadn't heard horror stories yet about it. But I did hear from one of their former staff members that their average turnover rate was 9 months.
Yikes.
Average. And so, you know, Blake, where you're at Fellowship, like there are plenty of the pastoral staff that have been there 10 plus years, 20 plus years. And, that's a sign of a healthy organization where people stay a long time, because if people are burning out, they're leaving. They're not still there 20 years later.
Yeah. And looking at like what you just said, pastoral staff, that to me can be more of an indicator than tech staff or music staff or whatever. Cause like church and like the music industry have kind of smeared a decent amount. And so it's like, I understand, and especially if you're young, like I understand if you need to go try a job for 10 months and like, hey, this one wasn't it, I'm going to go do this one. I'm like, sometimes it takes a few tries to get it and find the one that lands. But man, if you have like pastors who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s that are coming, staying for a year or two and then leaving, like that's a big red flag for leadership and how like decisions are being made, that it's like, okay, you're bringing in people who should be revered, like in their skill set. Generally, pastors have good amount of like teaching. They've gone to school. They've done all these things. Like they should be able to come in and affect pretty good change with their mastery, with their skills, whatever you want to call it. And if they just feel like they're like hitting their head against the wall for a couple of years and then leave, that to me is a bigger indicator of like, hey, we've got problems here in how this church is led, not just like small minor problems of like, oh, you were supposed to be here at 9 and you came in at 9:05. Like that stuff, who cares? Like that doesn't matter. But like the bigger systemic issues, I think can be something to like look for as quick as you can.
Blake, you've been here a little over 4 years, but it feels like 40 to me.
Well, yeah, that's Blake years. Every year with me is like 10.
So like a dog.
Yeah, in pleasure and in pain.
So you're like a dog. Is that what you're saying?
What's up, dog?
Okay, let's talk about wireless.
Okay.
Can you teach a dummy, I don't know, let's call him Blake, the basics of RF coordination and how to become better at it?
Yes.
In 2 minutes.
What if that was his answer?
Yep. Bye. Yeah. So I would say RF, like there's this whole idea of it that for people who had to deal with it before 2005-ish or something like that, or even 2015, it was this like dark art because there weren't really tools to like know what it was doing. Now, when you have things like wireless workbench and things like that, you can see what's going on in the RF spectrum very easily, and then you can use that tool to make your decisions. So RF is like, it's a kind of complex but basic process of you're using radio frequencies to transmit audio. And so there's a lot of in-depth tools that you can use, but then there's also a lot of like basic tools. So for like your average church, if you're using 20 or 25 frequencies or less, you can borderline pull your frequencies into wireless workbench, hit calculate, hit deploy, and you're not going to really have any issues if you know what you're looking for. So looking at things like noise floor, looking at things like DTV stations of like what's around you, paying attention to what the FCC is releasing as far as TV changes and things like that. Those aren't like hard to find bits of information. So it's when you start getting into higher channel counts and when you start to get into the idea of people are purchasing products blindly without looking at their RF spectrum before buying products. So you can buy something like a handheld RF scanner for $100 and see what's going on in your area and then make a decision of what band of RF to purchase. Or you can use Shure's Wireless Workbench. You can use the Sennheiser website, has a list of what TV stations are in your area. So I feel like wireless isn't that complicated to teach, but it's really challenging to get right if you don't have the right tools in your toolbox. So like I've been working, there's a company called Skylark that does a lot of AV installs and things like that. And like Zach Kimry, he used to be at Elevation. He's one of my good friends who works over there. He now calls me and I do remote wireless coordinations for them, or he'll say, hey, we're like gonna install the system at this church. Can you help me look at what we need to get? What band can we use? What can't we use? That sort of thing. And so I feel like RF isn't complicated to teach if you've got it thought out ahead of time. If you don't think it out ahead of time, like if I were going to buy in-ears and I live in Phoenix, I would never buy like Shure J8 in-ears because that band is from the start to the very end just TV stations. you can't fit it there. Like, it's not going to work. But if you don't know to look for that, then all of a sudden you get integrator X, Y, or Z saying, hey, we got this for you. And you're like, well, if they didn't look at it, that's a problem. But again, if you're buying on your own, it's even a little more complicated. So I would say, yes, it's very teachable. I can answer any questions you specifically have about it. But it's really an easy thing until it's not. And then there's just a lot of like trial and error to get it right based on, hey, the software says this frequency should be good and it's not. Well, you find this, and this, and then you kind of like go from there.
So, I mean, obviously there are a lot of churches that are, we'll use Phoenix for an example. Christ Church of the Valley has 20 some campuses. And so they probably have hundreds of wireless channels across all those campuses. But most churches in America, like 99% of them, might have like 2 to 4 channels of wireless. They're a small church. Yeah. They might be in Topeka, Kansas, or just random cities in America. Is it that big a deal for them? Or is it just, the less wireless you have, the less issues you're going to run into?
So I would say like system deployment always needs to be right, if that makes sense. Like if you have 4 sets of in-ears and you're just using 4 frequencies and you're using, I don't know, think of an old Sennheiser G3 unit or something that has a whip antenna coming off the back of it, stacking 4 of those on top of each other and transmitting 4 antennas into one another, you're not going to have great results. Like you're automatically creating problems, raising your noise floor, having issues. So I would say like the frequency selection in those areas obviously just gets so much easier because there's nothing around you. So that part of it doesn't matter, but still like it's kind of like the less sexy part of it. Like, when a church is installing a new lighting rig and you're like, hey, this is going to be $100,000. We're spending $60,000 on infrastructure. And that means you can only get 4 moving lights. You're like, what? That kind of sucks. But building that infrastructure to begin with then gives you like opportunity down the road to have it be, much easier, much quicker to do the right thing. So I would say there's a lot of RF principles as far as like how far to space your antennas. Like if you have transmit and receive antennas, make sure your transmit antennas are on stage or in front of your receive antennas so you're not blasting into them. Like things like that are, you would think are basic, but I guess kind of take some explaining for people who don't know that stuff. That can always be better if you're even in a small area, that sort of thing. So I'd say the basic principles always matter, no matter how many channels. Like the second you have 2 channels, you can create intermod interference with yourself. So that part does matter, But if you have nothing around you, then it's a lot easier to avoid that part of it.
And if you are that small church with nothing around you, does it really matter if you still are using 600 series wireless?
Legally, yes.
Legally speaking, yes.
Yes. Do people get away with it all the time? Yes. So I don't really think the FCC is going to come after you for that if you're a small church, but I still won't do it.
Sure.
So I will carry gear that can go wideband for like when I go into other countries and things like that. But when I use it in the States, I lock it down to the legal range of the States so that I'm not breaking any laws. And, when you're, like you said, doing a show in front of 80,000 people, granted that was Canada, but, I was doing these stadium shows for 60,000 people. Like I need to make sure that I'm not interfering with, something that is much more important than a country music concert.
Are those military channels now? Is that what it is?
They were sold to T-Mobile.
Oh, well then, that's not that important.
Blake already left T-Mobile.
It's not, but if you think about it, if you're a company that spent billions of dollars to own something, even if that's airspace, you now own that. So you have the right to that airspace. So someone else using your airspace. That's at least the mindset that wireless professionals and the FCC are looking at when they look at the 600 range. Now, granted, 653 to 664 will always be open as of now. Legally, the FCC has kept that range of the 600s open. So if you have gear that can do that, that's like, you're never going to have problems. So like on the Luke tour, I toured with, of my 18 ear mixes, 6 of them were up in that range. And I knew that, hey, no matter what, those 6 at least are always going to be fine.
Well, now that I know it messes up T-Maybe, I'm going to just buy all of this stuff.
You're going to buy T-Mobile's airspace. You're going to pay more for it than they did?
Not T-Mobile's, but T-Maybe's.
Oh, T-Maybe's, right.
Nice.
Is it going to work? Maybe.
Maybe.
Why does that range always work, though, Dan? Is that just like...
It's called the duplex gap, and the FCC, when they sold off all of that to T-Mobile or whoever, I think there's a couple
T-Maybe?
the T-Maybe. When that was sold off, I don't know if they chose it as like, hey, we're going to throw you a bone to make sure like you're not royally screwed if you own stuff up here. I'm not fully sure, but they chose to do that. So that's how it is.
But if you still have gear in the 700...
No,
you know,
no bueno. Sell
get rid
it
of that.
to Australia.
Yeah.
You'll be fine.
Is that military grade channels?
Is that
Some of
television?
there's some TV up there, but there's some military stuff up there too.
Do you know of any like basic websites where churches can go to and research this stuff pretty quickly? I mean, obviously Google, but
Yeah, YouTube, just Shure's wireless everything. You can look up things about wireless workbench. They have a lot of like, it's kind of dry, but like 1.5 hour long seminars of guys standing there with their PowerPoint that they've taught you not only how to use wireless workbench, but like, here's what an intermod is, here is what's happening, how your noise floor is raising or lowering, and here's best practices and that sort of thing. I'm borderline a Shure ambassador because I've had really amazing support from them. Like there's a couple guys there, one specifically, his name's Jason Waffle. He's one of my closest friends now that like I met through having a problem on the road, was given a phone number, called him, and now 4 or 5 years later, like he'll answer any question I have, and he is great. So I will say that like the Shure product is not only great, and I know I'm not getting paid by them, doesn't matter, but like their resources to me are even more valuable than their product. They're really, really good at educating their customer on how to use their product. And I've learned a ton just from watching their videos and that sort of thing.
nice.
Well, if I'll answer any question you have, maybe you should ask him to be on the podcast because he's on my target list.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. Have you reached out to him? Has he denied the request to join the Church Gear podcast?
Maybe I sent that request when I was on T-Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe. I talked to him this morning, so I'll ask him.
Yes, please do. Well, don't say like, has Blake reached out to you? Because maybe I haven't. I mean, he's got the last name W, so he's probably at the bottom of my system. And if you did ask him and I hadn't asked him, that'd be a disaster. That'd be really awkward.
That would be rough.
Dan, give me a disaster story. You've had all this time, in the space. Something bad has had to have happened to you at some point.
I mean, the not syncing the band's pack thing, that might be near the top.
You already
of the
told us
list.
that one, though.
And that didn't go badly. You're just like, Jeff gave us a disaster story where he fixed it at the last second. I'm like, you're not a disaster. That's a hero.
Man, in the moment, that can be a problem. I will say a tech disaster story that wasn't fully my fault, but definitely took some solving was I was doing tour rehearsals the beginning of this year for the Tyler Hubbard tour. And I was on a Digico Quantum 338 and the front of house engineer was on an SD12. And we got the consoles from the vendor and loaded our files and just went on our way and started going. And this was the very first day, everything like no problems. Everything was fine. The next day, we show up, everything's still working. All of a sudden we hear poof, and all consoles lose all audio. They're not seeing I/O. We're having all these issues. I'm like, what the heck is happening? So we call the console tech from the vendor. He comes over, tries to figure it out. We can't figure it out. We get on the phone with Matt from Digico. We're like, what is happening? What is happening? We can't figure it out. We've come to realize that one of the consoles was set to, you're supposed to have those things load in default every time when you power them up. If they load what the past session was, or like your past scene, or however you want to call it, you can have some issues. Basically, Digico consoles are just a PC. That's all they are. You just have this huge fancy mouse that's controlling software, that's controlling a PC. And so with that, we realized one of the consoles wasn't set to do that, and we had wasted half of the day of the band's time in rehearsal trying to like get these things working when we went ahead, put the console that wasn't working in, load the default session instead of loading, the previous one, which I had known that. And I just kind of assumed like this was already doing, like, why would this not do that? So then we, got that done, loaded our files, and everything was happy and we had no issues. So that was, rehearsal rooms aren't cheap. So that was kind of an expensive, waste of people's time, but we got it working. So
I usually blame all Digico issues on Ryan Shelton. And then when I see him at church on Sundays, I tell him that. So
Yeah, but he's nice. He answers the phone really well.
he is one of the
and stuff,
nicest
so it's
guys I
not his-
know, but still.
Matt Larson is also a gem of
Yeah.
a human being that answers everything when you need him to. On
Kyle
Sundays,
McMahon, too.
Yeah, on Saturday nights. That's one of the things I will say about Jason with Sure is kind of the same thing as he's like, if you're calling me at 9 p.m. on a Saturday, I know something's going wrong in a time where it shouldn't be going wrong, so I'm going to answer. And I feel like those Digico guys are the same way.
They don't have boundaries.
You know who never answers his phone is freaking Ryan Shelton. I messaged him on Facebook to get him on this podcast, I think a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years, and he finally replied to me last month.
Yeah, we're
I
just
don't know
going
if
to burn
I'd
down
respond
Ryan.
on Facebook very quick either. Like I deleted that off my phone. I'm
Some
like, all right,
people just
whatever.
don't have Facebook Messenger, which is our top, recruitment method. So,
Yeah.
then I hit them up on their MySpace.
Yeah.
Dan, if you were going to give us a tech takeaway, man, that's how we wrap all of our episodes. What would you, tell a room full of church techs out there?
I'd probably just reiterate what I was saying about your boundaries and just keeping keep things in perspective. Like, I guess I can throw two things in there. One is the perspective of like, we are not like stopping a world war from happening, that sort of thing. Like we are every day doing the best we can with our God-given abilities to make whatever situation we're in, whether you're a pastor or like we're saying a church tech or whatever, you're doing the best you can. So make sure you keep in mind, like, this is going to be what it's going to be. And the best I am right now might not be the best I'll be in a year, might not be the best I'll be in a few years, but just keeping a healthy perspective of your time, your abilities. Don't overdo it. Don't think that like, oh man, if I don't like patch this stage correctly and tape the cables down perfect, that someone's going to get mad. And if someone does get mad, like, then you've got something far more important than taped cables to talk about, that sort of thing. So I'd say that. And then I'd say also take the time to get really good at what you're doing, because this industry is all about knowing people and being a good people person. So if you're like, when people get asked to do tours, at least, and even I know some in church world, it's kind of like expected that you're good at the technology, that you're good at mixing, that you're good at RF, that you're like, whatever. If I get asked to do one of those things, people already have this idea that like, okay, Dan's going to handle it. It's more the like, how do you ride down a metal tube with 11 other people for 10 hours a night and not like be offensive to each other, be rude to one another, that sort of thing. So it's like, work on your skills to be really good, but then also work on your personal life to be willing to put in the work to. I mean, we need to change our attitude sometimes. It's like we think we know everything and we don't know everything. We think we're the nicest person when really someone else. You guys know Gene Kim. He is the gentlest, best person in the world, and I'm sure that's not always easy for him. He very much comes across like it is, but there's people in this industry that are really, really kind and are really good at what they do. But more often than not, they're getting called because it's expected that they know what they're doing, and they're like really easy to get along with. So I've worked pretty hard to try and be like the mayor. Like my dad was a surgeon before he retired, and he knew like the name of the janitors who worked in the hospital, and he knew their kids' names, and he was like, hey, how are they doing? Like that sort of thing. So for me, I want to be really good at like the skill that I need for the jobs that I have. But I also I have lists in my phone of birthdays and stuff of other monitor engineer friends or audio guys or backline guys or whatever. And I text them on their birthday. It's like, I just try and be like the person that you want to work with, not just the skill that you want to work with. So I think within the church world too, that can translate. Like, be the person who people want to like be around and want to work with, not the person who's shy and hiding in the corner,
Yeah, that's why Toby had to make his own company, because he was just never, someone people would hire personality-wise.
Yeah.
Blake, what's your wife's name again? Do you have kids? I can't
There it is.
What are your interests?
Dan, is there anything you want to plug, man?
I guess like just doing the remote RF thing has been a lot of fun lately, and I did one for a church down in Florida with a guy named Kevin Gomez.
Oh, we love Gomi.
Couple weeks.
Yeah.
That was last week, and I did kind of like a RF remote coordination and like a training seminar kind of at the same time with him and one of his other guys. So yeah, you can reach out to me on Instagram. It's Dan_McLaughlin, and I don't know. I've done it for Elevation. I did it with Adam at Central. They rented a bunch of gear for Easter, and he's like, I need this to work. And I was like, all right, log me into TeamViewer. And I just used TeamViewer to like he's like, you're pushing a bunch of buttons that I didn't know existed. I was like, well, you want it to work. Like we gotta do those things. So yeah, that's like the only thing. It's like not a real business or anything, but it's just me as a person, like affordably wanting to help people. Like, hey, I'll remote coordinate for you and I'll teach you everything I'm doing in the process so that next time you can do this yourself. And, Gomi now knows I'm always a phone call away to help him if he needs something, that sort of thing. So
Me too, Gomi.
Yeah. Nice.
Can't imagine someone calling me and just being like, help, I need this to work. Sounds so much pressure.
What would they call you to get to work?
Picking out a bourbon or cocktail.
The name of a Taylor Swift song.
Their flex play in fantasy football. Mm-hmm. Hey, this is highly ironic. As this man literally texted me, I'm going to out you. The entire draft for the Church Gear League, he's messaging me. I think I did 15 of his 18 picks.
I mean, I was going to pick all the best quarterbacks and have the best team ever.
Oh my gosh. Well, Dan, we appreciate you coming on the show, man, and for doing it in person.
Thanks for having me. It's great.
Hey listeners, we're introducing a segment called Church Tech Confessionals. This is a time for any church tech to anonymously confess the worst thing they've ever done in church production. Here's one now.
One time, I forgot to take off an IEM pack before going to the bathroom, dropped in the toilet, and had diarrhea all over it. I then threw it away and lied to the worship pastor about where it actually went.
Hey, if you have your own 3 to 5 minute church tech confessional, record it and send it to podcast@churchgear.com. And don't worry, we'll apply a voice changer and you'll be 100% anonymous. Your pastor will never know.
Thanks for hanging out with us. We hope to see you back next week for more absurd stories, tech takeaways, and overall buffoonery here at the Church Gear Studios.
Speaking of fantasy football, Blake, you said I now have an amazing team because you basically picked it for me?
Yeah, if you don't win, it'll be a crime.
And so that's how I picked my Church Gear team, is I phoned a friend, Jesus, except
He took your call? You sure that
he
wasn't
always
Satan?
takes my call. But unfortunately, I didn't start calling him for advice until after I had hired you. So you're kind of like, grandfathered in?
Yeah, in Genesis, there's the serpent and then there's Adam and Eve. And, the bad guys make it in every now and then. Did I just compare myself to Satan? We need to cut that.
Nope, leave it. And if you would compare Blake to Satan as well, or maybe less
This is
horrific.
terrible. This is our worst outro ever. Share this episode, but just cut off the outro.